Everyone. I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging the land that we are on. Portland is located on the traditional homelands of the Multnomah, Oregon City Tumwater, Watlala, Wasco, Cathlamet, Cowlitz, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many other indigenous peoples, both recorded and unrecorded. The indigenous peoples of these lands were relocated to the Grand Ronde Reservation under the 1855 Willamette Valley Treaty and are now part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. Despite displacement, the Grand Ronde people maintain a deep connection to their ancestral homelands and continue their cultural practices. Today, Portland's indigenous community includes people from over 380 tribes, both local and distant. PNCA respectfully offers this acknowledgement as a step towards recognition and repair, understanding that acknowledgement alone is not enough. We invite our community to engage with the Arrowhead Project, permanently on view in PNCA's historic hallway, just out here outside the Mediatek. The Arrowhead Project features interventions by indigenous artists, including Lillian Pitt, Greg Archuleta, Greg Robinson, Natalie Kirk, Shirid Yonker, Sarah Seastrom, Anthony Hudson, aka Carla Rossi, and Toma Villa. The Arrowhead Project is an initiative that aims to decolonize and indigenize PNCA's campus, addressing cultural appropriation and honoring indigenous histories. We hope it is an example of how art can be a force for change and an opportunity for reflection on our shared histories. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our final visiting artist lecture of the semester with Kristina Batiste. This lecture is our final one, but we'll have a new series of summer lectures coming up starting in June. And please save the date for our annual thesis exhibition featuring our graduating MFA and BFA students. That will open on May 1st for First Thursday during our monthly art walk events. And we have more information on PNCA's website about that. Tonight, I am delighted to welcome Kristina Batiste to PNCA. Kristina is a West Coast ceramic artist making minimalist, conceptual art and functional pottery, who became an artist later in life. Prior to ceramics, she worked as a writer and editor, a graphic designer, and in higher education, and she is currently a part-time librarian. The through line of her career has been a focus on distilling complex ideas into accessible, memorable forms. Kristina was the 2025 Mudge Fellow at the Groton School, the 2023 recipient of the Current Artist Award, presented by the Tacoma Art Museum, and a guest artist at the Northern Clay Center's 2023 American Pottery Festival in Minneapolis. She was the subject of a feature article in American Craft, is one of the artists in Black American Ceramic Artists, and was a subject of Hulu's Your Attention Please documentary series. Kristina has been written about in Ceramics Monthly, the Seattle Times, the Strategist, and the Craft Industry Alliance, and has authored multiple articles in Studio Potter. She is the co-founder of Tacoma Pottery Salon, and you can see more of her work at juniperclay.com. We're so excited to welcome Kristina and hear her lecture.
Okay, let me get in here. Oh, I have to go to this. Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I appreciate that. I spent some time thinking about what I wanted to do this evening. So before we start, I will set my intention for our time. What I'm hoping to do is show you some of the mental scaffolding that underpins my work and get into what I'm really trying to do through craft and why I connect to both craft and clay as mediums. I'm also hoping that I may inspire you to interrogate and articulate what underpins your own work, whether that is ceramics, I know there's some potters in the room, or another medium, or just the crafting of the life that you're living. And so that's what I hope to address with this time that we have. I'm going to start with a song, and I'm going to end with a song, and I'm going to tell you a few stories and share a few quotes in between. But to get started, I will take a line from everyone's favorite reader, LeVar Burton, from his LeVar Burton podcast. So if you're ready, let's take a deep breath. And let me talk to you about craft. Okay, so I'm a potter. I have been making work for almost 10 years, and I really love working with such a tactile medium. I love how closely tied it is to craft. And to me, craft is a vehicle for telling stories. And the most important thing about the telling and the hearing of a story is attention. As social media has taken great pains to teach us, attention is the most valuable thing in the world. It is so easy to squander, and it's so hard to put your attention where you actually want it. We are under a near constant assault on our attentional reserves. It's so much that we get burned out, and we cease to function as we would like. I don't know about all of you, but I've literally not been able to read the news recently. What's been happening has become so much in so many ways that as an act of mental preservation, I've had to take my attention elsewhere. So that is the context that we are all working in. It's a fight just to get and hold someone's attention. And sometimes you just need the world to stop for a little bit. And that brings me to the first song that I want to play for you. I first heard this song while I was driving with my husband through the forests of Northern California, and I'm going to play about 45 seconds of it and then explain why I am starting with this song. To come over here.
Well, I told her I'm good. And she said it was cool. Go on, do what you want. Or don't. It's all over again, yeah. You gonna mess up my head. You gonna mess up my head.
So it's a great song. It's sung little. It's called About Her Again. And the song is one thing on its own. But what I want to talk about is the structure of that and what it allows him to do. So I like this because he does something very, very well that I'm also trying to do, which is capture attention in a way that isn't demanding, but is instead just really intriguing. I think it's a really elegant solution to that problem. The song starts to play, and then it seems to drop out entirely. When we were listening to this with the noise of a car, we stopped our conversation to see if something was wrong with the radio or if there was some connection issue. So it starts up again, and we think, okay, it was just a weak signal. And then comes what I think is the real genius of this song, because he does it again. And with that second pause, he's got you. You know that he's done it on purpose, and now that he has your attention, if this is a song that appeals to you, you're going to listen to the whole thing. Let me go back slides. This is tricky. Okay. So in my work, I really love that pause. I want to use a little bit of space to grab your attention and make room for some contemplation, for some nuance, and I just need a little time. I need the world to stop for a minute. And I see minimalism as an excellent tool for that. I'm trying to create a space that we can cohabitate quietly, and I'm doing that by stripping away as much as I possibly can from every piece that I make, and then trying to bring in some note of simplicity, some detail that is interesting enough to examine. And that's my interpretation and presentation of minimalism in my work. I'm really fond of burnished bare clay and a line or maybe two lines, occasionally a very subtle texture. I like to be able to use the clay as the main source of color and strip away as much as I can wherever I can. And that minimalism is central to my work. When I was talking about interrogating your approach or interrogating what you're trying to do, I think that interrogation starts with what you're doing in a descriptive sense of the word. And I like the spareness and the starkness of things that don't have a lot of decorative element to them. That choice allows me to create that little bit of space, to create that little pause, similar to the way the structure of About Her Again allows that song to arrest your attention. And as to why I'm trying to create that pause, I want those moments because the world is so loud and the world is so fast and is so overwhelming. I see inherent value in slowing down, in doing things on purpose with a really deliberate intention. And I want my work to both illustrate and inspire that. I want people to be able to tap into something that they don't encounter every day in a way that can be both familiar and brand new. And that's what happened to me with what I call my spark cup. So I take the concept of the spark cup from the birder community. They have this delightful tradition that they call the spark bird, and that's the bird that first opened their eyes to the wonder of birds and transformed something familiar and mildly interesting into something so fascinating that they plan their lives around it. And that's what happened to me with this cup. This is one of the first cups I ever made. It's a simple pinch cup with an unglazed exterior, but it showed me three things about craft that I had not previously been aware of. So the first thing is that something those of us in this room probably already know, and that is that handmade pottery will change your life. That eating and drinking out of handmade objects, it's a fundamentally different experience than the same act off of mass-produced or manufactured goods. And that is not news to those of us in this room, but it was news to me. 10 years ago, that was news to me. Prior to that, I'd understood that, if you have fancy china, that's gonna really elevate the dinner, or if you have heirloom dishes, those can hold memories for people. But this cup viscerally demonstrated the magic of the handmade. And when I was in elementary school, we were taught that there were 5 senses. Kids now are taught that there are 9 senses. And there's no way we have mapped out all of the things that we can perceive. So even if we don't have a name for it yet, the fact that this object could carry something that I could perceive as different was revolutionary to me, and it inspired me to think about how even though I can't fully explain that sense or begin to understand the mechanism behind it, I could use it. And thinking about that really opened up a lot of possibilities for me. This cup also inspired me to think about my work in a distributed fashion. So rather than as a single thing or a group of singular objects, they're kind of more of a collective. And I think that inexact repetition of objects is very central to craft as a concept. And I think it's a really powerful force. I went to a library school, and this is there's a concept that really stuck with me from school. There's a concept in cataloging and library science that describes creative entities like books in 4 classes. There's the work, the expression, the manifestation, and the item. And this is a lecture, so I'm gonna have at least a few slides with a chart and a lot of words. This one, I'll explain really quickly with this example using Cinderella to kind of talk this through. Cinderella, the work, is the underlying rags to riches story of Cinderella with a blended family and some magic. There are hundreds of expressions of that work. There's Disney's Cinderella, and there's the book Stepsister. They all tie back to that work. Each one of those expressions will have a physical or some kind of manifestation, whether that's the full print run of a book or a master reel. And then there are individual items, a hardcover or a DVD or something that you can hold. And this framework, this way of thinking about it, really appeals to me because I want both that abstract underlying work and expression and the concrete thing that you can hold. So the work and the expression speak to the artistic vision. They're intangible, but they define the effort. And then the manifestation and the item are really grounded in the medium of clay for me, and they emphasize the functional aspects. So I get both sides of that artistic vision and that functional framework. And this way of thinking appeals to me as an artist when I map this onto craft. I just find that incredibly compelling. So that's the final thing that this cup taught me, and that's the importance of revision. I really love that part of the practice of craft is refining an original idea. That's part of the work. It's not a new work, it's just a new expression of that same idea. And that inexact but related repetition, I think, really celebrates the natural built-in variation of handmade ceramics. Every potter, you're always going to have differences. Even slip casters, there's always going to be a little bit different in each handmade item. And I think that's a really powerful aspect of craft. So this next piece I want to talk about is what I consider my entry into a larger artistic space. Excuse me one second. It's a piece I conceived about 5 years ago when America was dragged kicking and screaming into a national reckoning with race and was starting to face the vastly different experiences that people have in this country. This was, of course, the summer of 2020. And prior to this, while I had been making work and participating in events and showing my work and selling my work, I didn't share images of myself as an artist. And that was very intentional. I've been on this world for a minute. I know that work made by Black folks is, on one hand, held to a higher standard, and then on the other hand, it's devalued. And I just didn't want to deal with that. I didn't want to have to defend my right to make work at all or to make the kind of work that I like to make. I didn't want to have to defend my pricing, which understandably all artists have to defend pricing, but I didn't want to defend it because of my color. But that summer, the world just would not be ignored, and it really knocked on the door of my studio and invited me into the conversation. And this piece was inspired by 2 specific conditions at the time. The first one were the protests and marches and rallies and public gatherings and conversations that were happening all over the world, and particularly the protest signs and the signs people put in windows and on storefronts. People were so creative, and they were so willing to stand up and say something. I found that awe-inspiring. Just walking in my neighborhood or going into shops and seeing Black Lives Matter signs created a tangible sense of safety and solidarity. And it is not my week to speak for all Black people in America, but those signs meant a lot to me personally. It's probably part of that that unnamed sense or that thing that you can perceive. I could perceive the sentiment behind those signs in my body, in my soul. And I wanted to represent and recreate that. The second inspiration for these pieces came from contemplating the people who didn't march, who didn't protest, who weren't engaged. They weren't in vocal opposition to anything that was going on, but it didn't really affect them. They didn't engage with what was happening around them. Some people were caught up in their own lives and their own struggles, and some people didn't think it related to them, or maybe didn't think it included them. And some people had the luxury to choose whether or not to give this any attention. And this piece was designed to bring the power of the cultural revolution of those protests to that unengaged, unlikely audience. If the protests were the voice of the collective, I wanted to create a space for personal storytelling. I wanted the people who were going to marches to have a way to bring that protest from the public sphere into the private sphere and use these cups as a bridge, as a conversational tool to facilitate connection with people who aren't ever going to go to a march. They don't really understand what all the fuss is about. They may not believe there is a problem at all. I wanted to give people a way to start a conversation over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and talk about how race has impacted their life and their experience and their outcomes in a way that those people who aren't engaged could actually hear it. So this piece marked the shift from making work to trying to tell stories with my work, and this was its original expression. Design-wise, that symbol is an abstraction of the Black Lives Matter logo that was created by the Oakland Design Collective, it's a brilliant piece of work, I think particularly because it was designed to be both recreatable and recognizable at any scale. So if it was on a shirt or a pin or a hat or a cardboard sign or on a sidewalk, I wanted to create the feeling of chalk on the street and give the energy of somebody writing something on the street and put that on these cups. I made the cups pretty low, like low-ball cups and inviting cups, something that you could hold in your palm comfortably. They have a slightly elevated pedestal foot to bring in some of the pride and the determination and some of that upright nature of the people who were fighting for their place in the world. That cup was its initial expression, and then the second expression was a pendant, so it was a wearable protest sign. And I am working on the third expression now. It is tentatively named Justice Like Water, and it was prompted by everything that's happening right now, especially the very unhappy side of the removal, the very violent removal of the Black Lives Matter plaza mural in Washington, D.C. This was really painful for those of us who felt more seen through the visibility of that. This has been it's a really painful thing. So the design of the new expression of this, Justice Like Water, is inspired by a mid-century modern design for a juice glass or a water tumbler. It's a design that was very popular during the 60s era of the civil rights movement. They're a truncated cone, and so there's one that's up and one that's down. And this expression will not just be an individual glasses. They're going to be offered as a pair, along with a tall, narrow pitcher that can be poured out and shared. So I really wanted to bring that conversational aspect even more to the fore in this expression. Rather than the elevated pedestal base of that first expression, I'm really grounding these with a slightly inverted curved foot, and I'm getting into showing the regrouping that we're having right now, that holding steady that we have right now, this attempt not to lose ground and not wanting to be moved. Justice Like Water needs all the stability I can give it. So in addition to the abstracted Black Lives Matter logo, on the bottom they say, yes, still. And that is me being very literal, saying, yes, our lives still matter. Yes, this fight is still going on. So this expression really shows the appeal of that diasporic nature of craft. Because of that work and manifestation framework, I'm able to think about future iterations for this piece, but still tie them all back quite concretely to that conceptual work and place it in that continuum. So I can bring this idea into the world however it needs to be brought into the world. I'm not limited by having to do the exact same thing over and over. This mental framework shows how craft really lends itself to that flexibility in my work. There's a line that poets say about poetry, that a poem can be anything it needs to be. If it needs to rhyme, it will rhyme. If it needs to be performed, it will be performed. If it needs to be a single word, it will be a single word. And that's how I feel about using craft as a medium. You can make it anything that you need it to be. This next piece is a recent piece. It was completed at the end of last year, and it's called Even a Woman or a Slave. And it really illustrates a central aspect of my practice, and that's working from source material. Often things that I've read or come across or seen in the news that I want to explore by making something that catches my attention. Clay is really how I try to understand the world or understand a concept or a topic or something. And making is a form of contemplation for me. It's another reason that I really appreciate that framework of craft. Last summer, I was listening to an audiobook version of Aristotle's Poetics while I was walking my dog, and I heard a fraction of a line that just stopped me in my tracks. The Poetics is a treatise about storytelling. It's a very readable document. It's very engaging. It is aimed at playwrights, and it dissects the craft of writing an effective story. It's been a seminal piece of work in a classical education for centuries, and it's the foundation of a lot of ideas around what we judge as worthy or unworthy in the media we consume. There is a throwaway line in a chapter where he's talking about discussing character development, and he calls on playwrights to create believable characters that think and feel and act in ways that will be plausible to the audience. He wants you to think about who is the protagonist going to be and what can you have them do, what acts can they take. You can ask your audience to suspend their disbelief a little bit, but the stories need to have a veracity that the audience can recognize as true. Then he takes care to note that even a woman or a slave can be used to good effect, but we can't expect too much from those types of characters or the audience isn't going to buy it. And it's that even that got me. The casualness of the even is just, it's gutting. It exposes not only who this is aimed at, who this document is aimed at, which is not people who look like me, but it also exposes their inability to recognize the humanity of people who look like me. In some translations, it states that some people will say this, and you know what? We are on to you. We know what you mean when you say people are saying, or some people will say this, or I've heard tell. I am not going after Aristotle here. The point is that this thought was pervasive, that everyone thought that way, and many people still do. The very construct of pointing it out at all is condescendingly allows agency for people who are women or slaves, but in such a limited capacity that it's always going to be subject to the approval or the judgment of those who think they're superior. So the underlying hierarchy, this underlying hierarchy has baked into our culture for centuries. And the point is that it's not just about stories. The stories we tell shape the world we live in. So who we can see as plausible impacts not only who can play the lead in the play, but who is going to get funded, who is going to get hired, who is allowed a seat at the table. If people find that it strains the imagination to see someone different carrying a story, how are they going to believe that in real life? So this is where, those attacks on diversity and equity and inclusion are coming from. It is impossible for people who have always had access to opportunity to really and truly believe in the full humanity of others. So back to the work. I am calling this piece, Even a Woman or a Slave, a sonnet, and I'm using the word sonnet as a collective noun for a group of sculptures. So this manifestation is composed of 7 paired sculptures, so there's 14 in total, and each one embodies some literary theme through these kind of spare, gestural, minimal sculptural compositions. In a sonnet that's built with words, usually there's a shift somewhere, where the poet introduces a nuance or a different point of view, and I'm introducing that shift into each couplet. So this is belonging and isolation. So isolation is small. It's something you could hold in the palm of your hand and sits alone on its plinth. It's a little bit lonely, but it's also very content in its solitude. Belonging is this group of 3 that fit really close. They're a little bit taller. They fit really close and they're huddled together. And they have both the comforting and the smothering nature of belonging there. I went with a really restricted color palette. All of them are unglazed, single-fired stoneware. And in keeping with the quote, I've used inferior, basically worthless material. Those fir plinths are very cheap wood, and the clay is all recycled. I wanted to focus the attention for these pieces on the gesture of the form and the placement of it on the plane rather than any decorative elements. These next two, this is admiration and jealousy. And admiration can kind of visualize a future where they might be like their admired one. And jealousy is happening in both directions, both to and from that group of three. And making this whole series really guided my thinking on how some of these concepts intersect and overlap, and how easy it is to mistake one thing for the other, and how they can both nourish or poison. Both can be justified. You can have justified jealousy and justified admiration, or unjustified those emotions. And I really enjoyed exploring these. I do want to make it clear that I am not reacting to this quote and trying to prove that I can make art. I completely reject the premise that there is some litmus test that these would need to pass because of my identity. And for the people who think that I can't do it, there is no proof that's enough. There's nothing I could do that would be enough proof. And this is a Toni Morrison quote that really speaks to me. It's a little bit long, so I will just read the end of it to you. But it concludes with, somebody says you have no art, so you dredge that up. Somebody says you have no kingdoms, so you dredge that up. None of this is necessary. There will always be one more thing. And I don't have time to waste trying to prove people wrong. So final note on these, I made these as a solo exhibition at the Groton School in Massachusetts. It's a boarding school outside of Boston. And I had just finished setting it up in this little gallery, which is a beautiful gallery. And you can see those glass doors. I was on the outside of those, and some students were walking by. They couldn't see me, and I couldn't see them, and they kind of peered into the room. And one of them says, "Bro, these are just rocks." And I genuinely love that. First of all, for someone like me, he could not have given me a bigger compliment. I would love to be able to make just rocks. I think that would be brilliant. Secondly, when I had a chance to really engage with the students, I talked to them at the opening, and we had some great discussions around this piece and got into how minimalism can be deceptive and how creating something simple can be a lot harder than it looks. And really, people really engaged with the piece. And but I still love that line. I will forever consider "Bro, these are just rocks" as an alternate title to even a woman or a slave. This next piece is going to bring us back to some functional work. This is a ritual piece called 5 Moons, and the piece consists of 5 plates or oversized saucers or platters, and cups, 5 cups. 4 of the sets represent the seasons, and 1 represents the new moon. And I'm really trying to deal with time here. As I get older, I am noticing more and more just the passage of time. I didn't start my work as an artist until I was 40, and age has really informed my work far more than I would have anticipated. I have walked more of the road than I have left to walk, and a lot of milestones are behind me, and I don't want to miss out on noticing time passing. So this piece is an invitation to notice life through deliberate action. It's a functional sculpture to use the plate and to use the cup to mark time, to mark an occasion. There is the pale yellow flower moon of spring, and then the sky moon of summer, the shadow moon in fall, and then the snow moon of winter. And I would want each one to be used to create a personal or a familial version of this interaction, of this ritual. So, for example, for summer, I want people to put something on that plate and put something in that cup and take that pause. Maybe it's strawberries or popsicles or fresh peas. The cup could be lemonade or a really cold beer. And I want you to eat something and drink something that gives you that moment to notice it, to feel it and create a memory. And it doesn't have to be consumable. It could be a pile of dahlias, or it could be a handful of skipping stones or grass, or anything that really acts as a touchstone for you for that time, for that season. As far as expressions go, I'm still on the first expression of this, but I have made this first manifestation was scaled for an individual's use. I also scaled it up for exhibition at the Tacoma Art Museum last summer, where I made really big platters. And I was talking about it there, and someone mentioned how they were seeing this not as seasons of a year, but seasons of a life. And I found that really fascinating. That had not occurred to me, but it really resonated with me deeply that this seasonality can apply to a relationship or a year or a life or anything that has a beginning and an ending that you can think about through that passage. The second part of this piece is the new moon, and this is there for when you need to start again. Whether it's a project or a mood or your attitude, it's a fresh start. I find that beyond the first third of life, our culture doesn't have a lot of fresh starts built into it. When you're young, there is a new school year every year. Your birthday is a big deal. There are a lot of firsts that come kind of one after another, and give you that feeling of newness. As you get older, you might start a new job, or you'll move to a new city, or start some kind of new venture, but those occasions aren't as predictable, they're not as regular, they're not as frequent as they were when you were young. And New Moon invites you to take that reset whenever you need one. And the items, should feel new that you would use, like bread that you just made, or a notebook that you haven't written anything in yet, or an espresso that you just pulled. The new moon is a way of taking agency and creating that feeling of rebirth in life that we don't have structurally through this time. My late brother loved baseball, and the feeling behind New Moon reminds me of how he would describe the magical way that opening day feels when the whole season is ahead of you, and when it doesn't matter if you won the World Series or you didn't make the playoffs. Opening day is this renewed resolution to get up and try again. So New Moon is my favorite. I struggle with resets. I pursue a path longer than I should. I get bogged down in thinking about what went wrong. I get stymied with repetitive circular thinking. But New Moon is a permission to say cut and do another take, to start over. This next piece is also a sculptural piece, but it's not interactive. I had been doing some reading about Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a voting rights activist in the 60s and 70s. And you would probably recognize one of her more memorable quotes, which is, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." But there's another line that I think really demonstrates the depth of her commitment and her very clear-eyed recognition of the world and how it was. She says, "It seems like to tell the truth today is to run the risk of being killed. But if I fall, I'll fall 5 feet, 4 inches forward in the fight for freedom." And there's just so much power in that line, so much going on. It formed the basis of my portrait for her and gave it the title. So this piece is called 5 feet, 4 inches forward. Here it is. And as you can see, it's clearly not a likeness of Fannie Lou Hamer. It is a portrait of Fannie Lou Hamer. And I'm portraying her using five specific tactics that I will develop just quickly for you. The first one is scale. So this piece is 5 feet, 4 inches high. I wanted the portrait to really show the depth of that dedication through its height. It's constructed of 64 individual 1-inch high hollowed out slabs. They are stacked with just enough light to let the edges let light through, and through the middle you can kind of see through this very, very tightly stacked. And I wanted to emphasize the 5 feet, 4 inches, those 64 bricks, through the regularity of it. A lot of my work is much, much smaller. The sculptures of Even a Woman or a Slave some of them are really small, some of them are about this big. But working at this scale really helped me understand that quote and her life with a lot more clarity. The second slide, here's the second slide. She was a very powerful speaker, and what always gets me about this is it's lamenting what we missed out on by getting in her way. So Fannie Lou Hamer had a 5th grade education, and that is 5th grade at a school for black kids in 1920s, so in Mississippi. So it was not a great education. And I just think, what if we had invested in her? What if we had given her the kind of education and exposure and support to really spread her wings? What she was able to accomplish with the tools she had is incredible, and that's the second element of this portrait, which is the structure. So these slabs they're actually a little precarious. They're about 17 inches by 4 inches by 1 inch high. And this first manifestation was created for the National Portrait Gallery's triennial competition. They did not pick her, they did not pick it, but they had a weight limit, and I was trying to keep under that. And so this manifestation it's got some movement to it. The slabs are stabilized with a rod through the center. Each one rests on the one below, and it doesn't look like it should stand. It looks like it should fall over, and it will move and sway a little bit. And that lack of support, the treacherousness of her footing in the world, I wanted to put in this piece through the structure of it. The third thing is process. So Mrs. Hamer was a cotton sharecropper, which is, as you can imagine, very hard, very demanding work, and her family was incredibly poor. They did not have anywhere near the kind of resources that would have been required to buy tools to make that work easier or use the technology of the day to make the work easier. So I wanted the process of making these to reflect that really hard work of life. All of these are, each one's hand cut and hand rolled and cut and hollowed out. And I used a drywall mudding knife to shape the edges and create these sharp vertical lines on the edge. And the clay that would stick to that created those lines and that texture of dragging down, and created that vertical texture and the really sharp corners and the warping that I was able to get with this. I wanted that process of what I did to be visible in each one of those layers. And I also wanted to represent the colorism that she faced. She was very dark-skinned, and her color limited and shaped what she could do and shaped the way the world saw her. It set opportunities for her, not only outside, but inside the movement that she was working in. The way that she would have been perceived limited what she was offered, what she could have done. And it was really restrictive. And it was just, one more way that we blocked her path. And finally, there's symbol. So there's one layer that you're looking at here, about a third of the way from the top, that is fractured. And that is representing Mrs. Hamer was the survivor of state violence and medical violence in her life. She suffered greatly from police brutality, and she was also given what is known as a Mississippi appendectomy, which is a hysterectomy that is given without the patient's consent when they go in for another procedure, and they gave women involuntary hysterectomies, and it was legal, 100% legal. And it happened to Indigenous and brown and black women all over the South. And she was a survivor of that violence. And I wanted to make that violence an aspect or a focal point and bring that into the piece. She really used her story as a way to focus attention and to get people to listen and to understand her message. So this is my first portrait. I really enjoyed making it. I enjoyed abstracting out this quote and her life as a way of understanding her and understanding her situation, and really seeing parallels in what's going on today and in times of resistance in the past. The directness of her facing that threat reminded me of the words of Sophie Scholl, who was one of the activists in the White Rose Resistance Group in 1940s Germany. And at some point before she was executed, she said to a friend, "Well, how can we expect righteousness to prevail when there is hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause?" And Fannie Lou Hamer, with her 5 feet and her 4 inches, was willing to do that. Okay, so this last piece is another ritual piece, and this one is full of joy. This is called Sour, Hot, Bitter, and Sweet, and it was designed for use in a wedding ceremony. So there is a tradition that is practiced in the American South and in parts of West Africa called the tasting of the elements. And it's where the participants taste something sour, something something hot, something bitter, and something sweet as representations of the different elements that their newly joined lives are going to take on in the coming years. And they reflect on how the blending of flavors makes for a really rich life. So I wanted to create something that would be used not only in that ceremony on that day, but in days in the future. It could be used for salt or for ketchup or for almonds as a reminder of the ceremony and a reminder of the commitment and a reminder of that feeling that they achieved on that day. So when I label this, in addition to labeling the walnut and the porcelain, one of the materials is black joy. And I wanted to use the metadata around this work to reinforce the importance of carving that out wherever we can. It is made of 4 dishes. The first few manifestations of this have been porcelain. I made one with a copper blue glaze, and copper is a traditional 7th wedding anniversary gift. And I wanted to think about it not only as just your wedding day, but a lifetime. That lasts longer than just one day. And I did scale this up for exhibition at the Tacoma Art Museum as well. And not only, it just needed a little more presence in a great big gallery space, but I wanted to bring in the idea of a wedding that's often a communal experience, and that it may invite others to participate and be a part of that. So it's not just the wedding couple, but it's their whole community. This is one of those pieces that I just love making. It's really approachable. It's really easy to relate to, but the curvature of these bowls, the edges of them, the proportions of them on the plinth, every detail matters a lot. And I like considering that for each one of these sets that I make. So those are my 6 pots. I'm a potter, so even a portrait is a pot. I want to come back to my intention and just recap for a bit. So my goal was really to show you what is underpinning my work and to distill that, what I'm trying to communicate. I would say that I use minimalism as a tool to awaken a nameless sense and give you some space and tell you a story. I hope that the work will connect with you to show us what we have in common and open up new perspectives and possibilities. I have no aspirations of ubiquity. I'm okay with my craft being rare in the world. I'm doing this because I want to stand in opposition to the relentless speed and noise and distraction that we face. That overwhelm is something that I struggle with all the time, that daily disappointment of the mismatch between what I want, where I want to put my attention, and my actions, and where I actually do put my attention. It's a real struggle. That busyness of life can seem inescapable, but I'm trying to create an escape, even if it's just for the length of time it takes to drink a glass of water. So that is what I'm trying to do and why I'm trying to do it. So as foretold, I'm going to end with another song. So this song was recorded at the 7th annual Newport Jazz Festival, which is an outdoor music festival in Rhode Island. And this festival, this year, it was a really explosive year for the festival. It's the beginning of the 60s. There was a growing consciousness of appreciation versus exploitation in the jazz world. And it takes place in a really wealthy white community. There are huge crowds that come to the Newport Jazz Festival, and not necessarily for the festival. A lot of people are just there to have a good time on 4th of July weekend. So there's a lot of people around, there's a lot of turmoil, there's a lot of tension. People are just wound really tight. So the festival, it takes place in a walled park, but you can hear noise coming in from the streets, and Nina Simone is playing opening night amidst all of these demands on everyone's attention. So that's the context she's playing in. And I think she does something absolutely remarkable. She takes a song that this group would have known very well, You'd Be So Nice to Come Home To, and she uses their familiarity with it as a lure. So Nina Simone was, of course, a phenomenal pianist and a singer, and this is a song that they would have wanted to hear her sing. It's usually played in a really bouncy, flirty way. It's a very charming song. And instead of taking that arrangement to it, her arrangement comes in this very deliberate, very slow, syncopated pace that uses the audience's anticipation of what they know. They know the notes, they know the words, they know how this is coming. And she uses their anticipation to focus their attention. So I think it's a really remarkable tactic because it relies on them knowing the song. So unlike with the earlier song, where you don't have to know that to to get that hook. In this song, she is not trying to wow the audience with something brand new that they've never heard before, or really strike out with originality. Instead, it's because they know it and they're waiting for those next notes to come in and start singing that she can do this. It's subverting their expectations to attract their attention. So the whole song is about 5 minutes, so we won't listen to the whole thing, but I highly encourage you to listen at home. I'll play the first minute so you can hear what I'm talking about. So by the time that bassist drops in, she now has the space to give the audience something they might not have been expecting. The arrangement goes on to showcase her true mastery of classical music, which, even though she shouldn't need to have one, it's another shibboleth to that crowd that she's playing to. She's saying, you know, I know Mozart, I know Bach, I know Beethoven, I can play the music that you're familiar with. As Toni Morrison said, there's always going to be another thing, but she's demonstrating that as well. When she does start singing toward the end of the song, she completely transforms the meaning of this song. It is no longer this fun, unrequited love song. It's a protest song that is really filled with a lot of righteousness and resolution and anger. She doesn't change any words, so it's all done with her tone and the pace and the way that she delivers the lyrics. And obviously, I cannot know what Nina Simone was thinking, and this is my interpretation, but I have been reading this performance that way for years. And while I was preparing for this talk, and I found this, the YouTube version that I was going to play here, there was a comment on it that articulates that interpretation with such clarity that I will give it to you verbatim. Oh, what just happened? I think I was on the wrong screen there. I have to go back here. Oh, no, we don't need to hear it again. Although I have listened to that song many, many times. So in this quote, it says, "You is no longer a person, but it's a world free of oppression, free of discrimination, free of racism." Nina's piano playing is epic, and she turns the lovely tune into a Bach fugue, hammering home those desires for a better world. And I think this is so true, and I loved the way that he phrased that. So that magic, that transformation of something familiar into something powerful and more than its surface interpretation, that is what I am trying to do with cups and plates and bowls. I want to take these things that you know that you've used all your life and give them some new meaning. Your knowledge of them, your comfort with them, that acts as a portal that I want to use to take you somewhere new. And that is why I love craft. So if we can all just take another deep breath together. And thank you for your time and attention. If anyone has any questions or anything they want to see again, I am happy to answer them.
Any questions?
Hi, I'm really curious about your process and how you find the things that you're hoping to motivate through the work in the process of getting there, working with the clay, etc. Since craft is like really process oriented.
It is. Can you just say that question one more time?
Like the slowness and the noticing and the being present that you're talking about that you want people to get out of your work or embody with the work. could you kind of talk about a little bit where you find that in your process of making? Like, do you find that, or is your process chaotic and opposite of that?
It's it's a little both, I would say. Sometimes the piece or the act of making it is the impetus for starting it. There's a piece I have that I didn't talk about today called Compose, which is a series of very thin, wafer-thin porcelain discs that sit vertically in a piece of wood. And it was inspired by a piece of wood with a bunch of cuts in it that was an offcut that was used to make other cuts. And it was beautiful. And so I wanted to figure out a way to use that and think about that. And in the process of creating something that was thin enough to fit in a groove made by a saw blade that would hold steady, it really inspired me to think about the fragility of that piece and how it focuses your attention. It's another piece that really demands your attention, because if you're not paying attention, you will break those discs. They're so thin that if you're not paying attention, you're going to break them. So you have to be paying attention. But it was inspired by the base. I was not thinking of, I want to make something really fragile, and that came about.
Hi, Kristina. Thank you
Hi.
for that presentation. I love how thoughtful you are with your pottery. My question is about the 9 senses. This is new information for me, and I'm wondering if you could expand
It was new
on that.
information to me too.
And how do you bring that into your practice?
So, well, it's honestly, the revelation of that there were 9 is very recent, literally as I was working on this talk, because I've always been thinking about how handmade pottery, that you're able to perceive that I did not know that until I started eating off of things that I made and things that friends made, or things that I started buying that were handmade. And I mean, there isn't a potter alive that will tell you different. We all know that to be true, that this is different than eating off of something that is mass produced. So I knew that there was this sense, there was something out there like that. And I started kind of looking into, well, what is this? What am I thinking about here? And I was talking about the senses, those 5 senses. And my husband's like, there's not 5 senses. He was like, there's 11. But there's these 9 senses. One of them is balance, is a sense of balance. One of them is a sense of what is going on inside of your body. One of them is a sense of your space in the world, like how you are in the world. Temperature, I think, is one. So I don't know those 9 off the top of my head, but just recognizing that in living memory, we've basically doubled the number of known senses. Okay, there's more. If we just figured out another 4, there's more. And that was interesting to me.
Other questions? I actually have a question. A lot of your pieces seem like their functionality, they're tuned into sociocultural, political ideas, and there's this idea of ritual embedded in them. When you exhibit the work, do you ever bring in kind of participatory things or rituals that you invite the public to engage in, or is that like more the invite for like a private ritual? And kind of how do you make that decision?
I have not done a public interaction one. I'm working on something now that I think will have, as part of the exhibition, it will be much more participatory. But to date, I have not done that.
Questions?
Oh, I just had a question on how you go about choosing the weight and color and thickness, because I noticed you have such a variation in how your process is for choosing that.
So I do like when I'm making functional work, I like the work to feel a little bit more substantial. A lot of some people like really, really thin and delicate pieces, and I actually like it to have a little bit of weight to it and feel like something substantial that you can hold. There's a natural tension with that against, how heavy do you want this to be? And you want to make the parts that people are going to touch, the handles or the lip, to be refined enough so that they don't feel out of place when they come into contact with the body. But I like the weight of clay. I want you to feel that when you're holding the piece. Does that answer your question? You can elaborate or ask a follow-up if you want. Okay.
Your work just looks, I mean, it's beautiful, but it looks so simple and clean and well thought through, and I just am having a hard time imagining, what is your studio like? Is it kind of like, is there any chaos? I just kind of I'm not seeing, I don't know why, I just am imagining, the studio.
Are you a potter?
No, I'm not.
Oh.
But yeah. But I don't know. I just kind of, it makes me curious, like how, is there a studio that you routinely work in, and just kind of a sense of the size of that? And
Okay. Well, so I'm my studio, I have my own studio. It's in my home in the basement, and I love it. I love working alone. I do there's some beautiful things about community studios where you get a lot of interaction and you get feedback and you get ideas from other people and other people get ideas from you. But I love working alone. And my studio is not very pristine. I don't understand this. I have this huge work table, multiple huge work tables, and every time I'm working, it feels like I have to pick something up and move something out of the way in order to work on that thing. There's too much stuff. So I do need to pare that down. I'm going to be shifting studios. I live in Tacoma, Washington right now. I'm moving to a very small town in California, and I'm going to have, for a while, a very small studio there. And so I know that I'm going to have to downsize my thinking and probably will get a lot neater. I do have a lot of tools. I think when you're starting out as a potter, you go through this tool acquisition phase where you're getting a lot of tools and you don't end up using all of them. And so I really should pass those on to another potter who is just getting started out and wants all the tools and can play around with those. But no, it's not very pristine. That would be one of my first hires if I ever decide to hire someone. I would hire a studio elf to come in behind me and clean up after what I'm doing.
So I'm really curious because you're a functional object maker and you're also a sculptor, right? And maybe those are two terms we can use to label that, right? And those are often seen as you are one or you're the other, and they're often, well, maybe not often, but rarely or in certain ways seen in one practice. And so I'm wondering about the relationship between those two sides of your practice, the one where it's these functional objects that serve a really direct purpose, that you're kind of putting, you're embedding these conceptual ways of thinking about them into it, and then the sculptural practice where it's about contemplation and viewership and representation, and maybe less about holding it in your hand.
Yeah.
How do you think about that in your practice?
That is a really interesting question. I think, so when I started this work, I was not thinking in terms of abstract or sculptural pieces. I was really making pots, making functional pottery, and I love making pots. I love it. And I think that I don't imagine there will be a time when I don't love making a mug or when I don't love making a cup or a plate or a bowl. It's a really satisfying thing to make something that is going to be used by people. Sometimes when the idea is too big or it needs more space, I think that's when I started making things that weren't necessarily functional. When I had something in that idea, or as I was making it, it felt like it needs more space, or it needs to be less tied to a functional use. in order to fully exist. Yeah.
Well, just quickly to piggyback on what was just said, I feel what attracted me, just I saw you were talking and I just came, and I think it was this integration of body and soul, like an integrated sense of wholeness that I think is really powerful, especially in this moment when we're talking AI and all the crap of everything. I think that coming back to your body and your soul is where it's at. So thank you.
I'd like to ask about the varying iterations before you arrive at a final piece. I know simplicity is hard to get to sometimes, and I know with your experience with writing, you've gone through all the editing. What does it look like to edit your concepts?
Well, I'm not very good at drawing. And so I don't sketch out ideas and sketch out things in dimensions. I will think things through a lot. I will do sketches in cardboard as well. And I will do sketches in any three-dimensional kind of medium that I can use. So for even a woman or a slave, those did start out, those gestural forms, those took me a really long time to arrive at what each one of these different things were going to look like. So those did actually start as a sketch on a piece of paper. And then I ended up cutting forms out, cutting these shapes out to see what I would think about them and how I would physically arrange them. I wanted that verticality. This is actually, my work manifestation item thing. This is actually a new expression of the piece compose I was describing, the very thin porcelain discs, because it has this clay and this delicacy of it that is still coming through this. So I started off drawing these on paper. I cut the paper out. Then I started thinking about the size of the plinth that I wanted to have and had a mock-up of that. And then I started to play around with scale on cardboard a lot more. So some of the ones like isolation really moved in scale a lot. These gestures, once I got some of the gestures in place, or I had an idea of what I wanted them to be, those stayed pretty fixed. The scale changed a lot, and the placement of them on the plinth moved a lot. And I did not make the full run of 14 to test. I made a smaller set. I think I made, 5 or 6 of them in clay and fired them to see what I thought of that clay body and that weight and size. And then I made the final round. I probably would do another, there's another iteration of this. I think that I might want these to feel a little more rounded. I liked them. These were built, slab built, a very thick slab that then I shaped and compressed and cut into these shapes. And that was the goal of this iteration. But I might want to actually make these as 2 halves that I bring together to have a hollow space in between, so that they have a little bit more dimensionality to them. These are much more in a specific plane, and I might want them to break out of that a little bit. Like you can see the one in the big disc in the back. That's satisfaction, and it's really it's big and round and thin. And I think that satisfaction might want a little bit more width.
Well, thank you so much for a beautiful artist talk, and thank you all for coming out.